Hey, Barbara.
Hello.
Nice to see you. So as you know, I've invited you here to chat a few things around chronic pain. We've got a couple of our lovely members who have raised that they are working through some chronic pain. And I thought, what better person to chat to than yourself, who's experienced it yourself. So I'd love to hit you up for your advice around working with chronic pain and keeping moving. But first of all, can you tell me a little bit about your background with chronic pain? So tell me about what you experienced and then what helped you to get through that.
Yeah, sure. So I, as probably some of my clients know as well, I used to be a piano teacher and a pianist as well. So I've been doing that, playing the piano since I was 5, and then I've been teaching probably since I was 17 or 18. I sort of started in high school, and when I came to Australia, which was in 2011, I sort of kept doing that. So that was my career, and performing and playing and teaching was something that I was doing professionally. And I think it was 2015, I was preparing for, let's say, a huge recital. So there's actually a diploma over there on the wall that cost me a lot.
Background, right?
And there was a piano in the background as well. So I was preparing for a very sort of difficult exam, basically, that would give me an associate diploma in music here. And I was, at the time, I was still working sort of 2 or 3 jobs, and I was trying to practice and sort of get ready for everything. And it was a really stressful time in our lives as well here, sort of still being on a visa. So there was a lot of things happening in our lives, and I really tried to push it. And I think my hand started hurting at some point during that preparation. So I think 3 or 4 months in. Normally it takes about a year or a year and a half to prepare like such a huge program.
Wow.
To get ready for a performance. So it was actually quite big. And my hand started hurting. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just thought, oh, I strained a muscle. It's probably nothing serious, and I should maybe rest over the weekend and then keep going. So I kept going, and the pain didn't really go away. So at the time, I, use ice packs and use some sort of pain medication just to get you through. And
was it with hands?
It was in my right hand. So it was mainly in my right hand, sort of around the we say the second finger. That's what I say. So around the finger here, going all the way up to my wrist. And I spoke to my teacher at the time, and she was a good teacher, but she was one of those people who want things to be very, very perfect. So she was a perfectionist, and she said, well, it is up to you, but you can have heat packs or ice packs and sort of keep going, which I know now was, it was not a smart thing to do. I should have just taken a break. But because I've already worked on it for a few months, and I've already booked an exam, and I paid for it as well, it was quite expensive for me at the time. I just didn't want to lose the money. I didn't want to lose all the work that I did. And also, if you do stop, especially in piano playing, when you get back to it after a few months, you're sort of starting from the scratch again. So things you don't really retain as much. So I just thought, well, I'll push for another 3 or 4 months. And then once I pass, I'll give it a rest and it will get better. So I did push myself, and it started to get worse and worse. I did see a physiotherapist at the time. That wasn't very helpful. It's another person who did some dry needling and acupuncture. That actually made it worse. So I sort of saw a few people at the time to try to fix it, let's say, or even to try to sort of survive until the exam. None of it really helped. I did push through. I got a really good grade. I passed the exam, and I was really happy. And I sort of rested that hand for a few months after the exam. And I think that was October 2015. And every time I'd sort of get back to playing, it would get painful again. So exactly the same spot, and there was pain, and nothing was really helping. So I was still teaching at the time, but because the level of teaching that I was doing was mainly, primary school, a bit of high school, it was nothing compared to, the level of my playing. So it wasn't too bad. And I think a year later, when nothing really helped, I did see another physio. I've been having some manual therapy done for about 3 months, and it didn't really make any difference. So
can I ask, were they able to kind of identify exactly what it was?
No, not really. So the physiotherapist basically said it was probably some sort of a tendonitis or a muscle strain. They thought it was coming from my neck, so they've been doing some work on my neck, and then on the hands, and then they thought it was a pinched nerve. So yeah, so I think there was a lot of people sort of saying different things. I did see a hand specialist as well, who was a very rude and very sort of insensitive person, who told me that I'm probably not up for it, that, you know, if it's hurting, I'm probably not good enough to be a pianist. And this is a result of, he was just a horrible person. Yeah, so they didn't really have a good idea of, you know, what was going on at the time. And then, it's just a long story, so I'll just go short. So we went back to Poland. I did heaps of tests over there, paid for heaps of, you know, different scans and things. They didn't really find anything that would warrant the severity of the pain. So it seemed like that all the tissues were healed and that looked okay. So we went back here. I've met with some people who, let's say, retraining pianists that were having injuries before, so they have their own sort of school in the US. So I've gone through that period for a while, and they're mostly pianists. So I've put a lot of money and time into retraining myself, which again did not help and actually made the thing worse. So I got to the point where before I just couldn't play, but then I couldn't hold a pen. I couldn't write, I couldn't type. I had to quit my job. I had to quit teaching. Because I could barely move my hand. And it sort of started weirdly radiating to my other hand. So from something that was, you know, painful but quite little, it became a huge issue, where I went on pretty heavy painkillers for about a year. And that didn't help much. So I was basically just staying at home. I stopped working. I stopped really doing anything. I was trying to find another person who could maybe fix me and do something.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was very debilitating, and also I think very tricky. And I think a lot of people who are struggling with chronic pain can relate to that. No one really believes you at some point, because you did all of those tests and you did all the scans, and not much came out of it. So even if you get a bit of degeneration here or there, it's most of the time with chronic pain, it does not relate much to the damage in your tissue. So the damage might be little, but you're in a lot of pain. And I think, look, I don't want to generalize, but the health professionals that I've met, no one could really do anything. And they didn't believe me. They were like, well, you just rest and it will get better.
Yeah.
And you
People
say, well,
like a specific, like a really tangible, clear picture of why the pain is there.
Yeah, and I think as a patient, this is what you expect too. So you just want to know, well, this happened, and you know, there was a surgery or there was a special treatment. There's something that you know, trained health professionals can do to help you with that. And when you get to the point where you've seen, you know, 20 people in 2 different countries and no one really knows what it is very frustrating, and also leaves you in a place where you know, you don't really know what's the next step. So do you sort of stay at home and not do anything for the rest of your life because you're in pain, or do you, like, what do you do? No one really has an answer. So I think this is a huge thing for people that are struggling with chronic pain. There is nothing you can do, and no one really has a good solution for you. And especially, you know, if you've got a family, if you've got kids, I can't imagine going through that, because it was just me and my husband. He was happy to support me, and I could take my time to sort of look for different answers as well. But if you have a family, if you've got kids, you can't stop. It's just life doesn't stop only because you're in pain. So I think that was the most sort of difficult sort of thing in you know, being in pain, chronic pain. So I think it was 2 years later, or even 3 years later, when again the whole story went through. I didn't really find anything. I sort of started working some office jobs where I didn't really have to type too much, more of a reception kind of thing. And my husband was seeing a physiotherapist here in Walleye Creek, and then she recommended her friend, who was an exercise physiologist, for him. So they sort of gone through the acute phase of the rehab, and she said, well, now I feel like you can sort of move towards working at the gym, strengthening your knees. He's had some issues with his knees, and this is the guy that I want you to see. So he went to see him, and they sort of chatted about me, and he said, well, she's had this issue for so long. Is there anything that you can think of that can maybe be done? So he, let's say, had a few ideas of what it might be and also how to sort of work around it. And I agreed to see him. So I've been seeing him for about 2 years, I'd say.
Daniel, obviously, Daniel.
It is, yes, it is Daniel. So so he basically sort of approached it from a very different direction. So it wasn't about finding a, structural issue or some damage in your tissues or anything tangible. I know how that sounds, but it was more about sort of understanding how the pain works and what can influence the pain and what can influence how severe the pain is as well. So it is not only what you do, but it is also, it's got a lot to do with your environment. It's got a lot to do with the levels of stress that you sort of go through every day. So there's a lot more factors in the pain experience that people think that there are. So we think that it's only biomechanical, and sometimes it is. Sometimes the issue is structural, and there is something that can be done to fix it. With chronic pain, if it lasts for a long time, a lot of times it is a lot more. So there are more factors that we have to take into account, things that are triggers, things that are making it worse. So I would stop playing for months and I'd still get pain.
What did you notice for yourself, and what did you change in your lifestyle?
So I think in the beginning, the main thing that we started doing was, I'd say, I wouldn't call it exposure therapy because it wasn't really that, but I think it had little parts of exposure therapy to it. So I'd sit down at the piano and I'd just look at it. And I'd try to, and yeah, I remember myself sitting down and sweating, just stressing out only because I'd be there. I wouldn't even touch it. I wouldn't even move. So it was just sort of being in that moment and trying to relax a little and sort of stop associating it with a threat, because that's what it mainly is. So anything that's a threat would obviously cause the reaction in the body that's pumping up the adrenaline and turning on that system that sort of goes fight or flight. So for me, it was little exposure therapy in the beginning. It was, so my triggers, and this is still something that I get, is stress. So obviously the levels of it are very different now because I'm managing it pretty well. But every time I get stressed sort of to the point where, I feel like my hand is hurting, it means that it's some sort of severe stress in my life happening.
It's an indication, right? To go, right, what's happening in my life? Where do I need to adjust and look after my stress?
It is. And I think it's a great thing that you said now. It is, I think it's good to think about it in a way where we can sort of sit down and think, well, what is happening in my life? Was there anything that's changed? Is there anything that is causing me more stress than they would usually cause? Is it, it could be relationship issues. It could be a new job. It could be issues at work. It could be, for me, it's my uni now studies. So if I do get really stressed, the pain sort of creeps in again. And so definitely stress is one of those things for me. Another thing that I found, and I've spoken to quite a lot of people that are suffering from chronic pain, and a lot of us, I'd say, we're either perfectionists or we sort of miss our old selves, I'd say. So chronic pain, I think, takes away a lot from you. So I used to be a teacher and a pianist, and I basically had to let go of it because of what happened to me. So it was a huge change in my life. But for a lot of people, it could be, being the best mum that you want to be. And then suddenly you can't, because it's really hard to get up from bed in the morning. It's really hard to be sort of doing everything that you want to do. You can't. You suddenly have to start pacing yourself and sort of, I think, you have to start being compassionate towards yourself and be like, well, I want to do all of those things, and maybe I could have done it 10 years ago, but I can't do it anymore, and it has to change and it has to be done differently for me to live my life really well. And I think this is really, really hard. So and I think everybody has different triggers. So for me, it is definitely stress. For other people, it can be something else. And I do find that a lot of times when I feel overwhelmed, when there's too many things happening, there's a really nice metaphor of, a cup So you have a cup and this is your life, and there's a lot of things that are happening in your life and they're slowly filling in the cup. So it can be your work, it can be your family, it can be everything that you do that's sort of filling it up. And at some point it's full and you can't take on anything else. And if you do try, it sort of goes over. And this is where, this is where you get a flare up. This is what we call flare ups. So suddenly the pain is back and you have to step back and sort of figure out, what caused it. And it might have not been one thing. It could be a few things happening at the same time. If I have a cold and just my immune system is sort of a bit down, usually it is associated with the pain. So,
and is the pain still centered? It's still in the same place? So still you're right.
Very much so. Yes,
so
very much so.
A really clear indication that, I guess, now it's so great that you've got all that awareness, and unfortunately it took you so long to get there. But now that you've had done all that work and stuff, and now you've got that clear awareness, so that clear indication of like what's happening in my life and what's flaring it up and that, and you can manage it a bit better. Is there any other ways that you've found helpful to manage it? And obviously I think from what we've chatted before, like the chronic pain has kind of led you into training as well. So tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so when I started seeing Daniel, obviously we started sort of small, and we didn't even start from exercise straight up. So we mainly talked about, the stresses and things that might be triggers. So we did actually spend a lot of time just chatting, just trying to figure out where this is coming from. And so doing a little bit of exposure therapy, and I had little tasks of, playing a little bit on the piano, just spending 30 seconds there. So, there's a lot of people having different issues as well, could be back pain. So it's sort of taking it step by step and going, well, maybe we can do this for 20 seconds and just see how that goes. So that was definitely the first thing that we did. And then we slowly moved on to exercise. So sort of strengthening those muscles. And I had a lot of issues with sort of putting my wrist in this position. Like this was really, really painful. So we started doing different exercises that would sort of trick my brain a little into getting into that position while thinking of something else. So little games that we were doing when my focus had to be somewhere else, but the position of the hand was this. So that was quite interesting. So taking away that focus from the actual movement, but focusing on something else while doing it was quite helpful. So we started this, and I think pain science education for me was a huge thing. So sort of learning how the brain and the body work together and how the pain is produced in the body as well. So how, those little sort of stresses can influence the experience of pain. So understanding a bit of neuroscience, obviously, none of us is a neuroscientist, and we're sort of just barely touching on the subject, but understanding that was really helpful. So there was quite a lot of...
Did you learn that through Daniel, the exercise?
I did. So we started chatting about it. And then in the very beginning, he sent me a few sort of videos that were touching on the subject. There was a great neuroscientist, Australian actually neuroscientist in South Australia that's running the whole department, and they're doing quite a lot of research on chronic pain, Lorimer Mosely. And he's got a few really amazing, funny videos. He's a really, really funny, interesting guy who talks about chronic pain in a very...
to share with my clients.
Yeah, sure. I can send you links. I think they're great. One of them is Tame The Beast, is an amazing one. Very short video, sort of explaining how chronic pain might work in very simple, simple words, but also, it's very helpful. So I started off little videos, and then because I like to know things, I was like, well, I actually want to know more. And for me, the big thing was understanding how it might work. So I was like, well, for so long, I had no idea. I sort of felt really confused why I would hurt without doing anything. And then that was a big sort of a light bulb moment for me when I went, and I think that calmed me down. So for me, it sort of released a bit of stress as well. And I did see the difference in my pain levels straight away. So, well, now I'm starting to understand why this is happening and why am I hurting, and you sort of know what you can do to get better, or at least try to get better. So for me, that was a big thing. So yes, and then I started buying books. So Explain Pain is a sort of big book that you can buy, and it's on chronic pain. It's a bit more complicated and like the scientific way, but still, quite accessible, I'd say,
Mhm.
for general population. And they also have their own workbook for people in pain. So there's an actual notebook and a workbook where you can work through your flare-ups. It's got a really beautiful diagram where you can sort of figure out your stresses, and you go through a map where you can map it all out, and you can always come back to it. So if I have a really heavy flare-up, just doesn't go away for 2 weeks, I get back to it. I sort of look at it again and I try to figure it out again. So I found this to be very helpful. And I think I bought a few more books that were recommended to me that are just on chronic pain, and a bit of neuroscience as well. So yeah, so I got really interested in that. And at some point I obviously joined groups for people in chronic pain, and I've seen quite a lot of physiotherapists and exercise physiologists and psychologists as well, sort of working with people in chronic pain. And I thought it was really great. There is a huge group of people who sort of understand what we're going through, and they can be really helpful. So I think that was the moment where I got really interested in exercise physiology. I thought it was quite amazing that, I've seen so many specialists and so many health professionals over, the 3 years, and no one even had the slightest idea of what could be happening. And then you suddenly get into the world of people who are like, well, we might know, or we might actually try to help you. We might not know for 100% what's happening, but we have a pretty good idea of how to manage it. And I think, this is where I went, well, I can't really teach anymore, and I could probably get back to it now, physically, but I think it was very traumatic to be in pain and to still teach and to go through all that. So I didn't really feel like it anymore. And that's when I started doing my personal training course. So Daniel was the one who recommended it. He said, well, what if you do personal training course first and see if this is really something that you like to do? So working with people in gym environment, this is what you're going to be doing as an EP, obviously in a slightly different setting. It's a clinical setting, but it will be similar. So maybe do that first and see if you liked it. I loved it. I thought it was teaching people something else, but also helping to change their life. I thought it was really powerful. And I got into uni, and now I'm sort of finishing my second term of the first year. So really excited. I think, there's a lot of people who don't really know what exercise physiology is, and there's a lot of different exercise physiologists, but I think, the ones for me working with people in chronic pain are, just great. If you can do that, it's amazing.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really fascinating story. It's so interesting to hear about your journey. I mean, obviously I've known a little bit about, but to hear it sort of broken down like that, and to what a journey. It was a long period to do so many different things. And gosh, I can understand how frustrating that would be. I've spoken to so many people, and so many, obviously a lot of our clients and that people we come into contact with resonate with chronic pain, and different varying levels and varying areas of the body and stuff. But I think your story will be quite inspiring, and I think it's really interesting to hear that approach of what you're talking about with exposure therapy and the just learning about how the brain processes pain and everything. I feel like it's a slightly different approach to kind of standard stuff where we've almost been scared of pain, and it's avoid it, so it's sort of
evolutionary, it is something that we need. If you don't feel pain, you're going to die. So it's good to have it. It's an alarm, and it's sort of giving you an idea of what to avoid, and most of the time it's great, but it's a bit like a faulty alarm, so it sort of goes out when it doesn't really have to. There's a bit of smoke and it goes, there's a flare up. Well, it's normally, a normal, say, person who's not suffering with chronic pain wouldn't even notice. So we still need it. It's just, having a bit of trouble.
Pain can, it's a signal. It tells us something, and generally, if it's acute, it's there for a reason. It's telling us something of it. But if it's that consistent chronic pain, and there isn't a clear, direct, acute reason for it, then it's what is? That's when you can dig a little deeper. So that's really interesting and fascinating. And so, what would you say? Do you have just one or two sort of top tips for people to take away to explore?
I think first of all, I'd say be compassionate. And I know it's hard to say because we're sort of, conditioned to be strong and conditioned to be able to do everything in our lives ourselves, and, be independent and be there for your family. And we always sort of want to do best, and it's great. But I think having that compassion for yourself is what we really, really need. So some days will be harder than others, and some days things will just happen that are out of our control. And, you know, if you can sleep in, if you can just slow down for a day, it's okay. Like, the world's not going to end if you do, and you can always, you know, ask people for help and sort of pick up things the next day. So definitely have that compassion, the compassion that you would have for your loved ones. This is what I always think about myself, because I'm really, it's difficult for me to be compassionate. I just want to keep going. And I keep doing this even now. And my husband's always looking at me going, well, you have to stop. Like, you just have to. So it's nice to have somebody else. If you don't, though, then just think of, what would you say to your loved one? What would you say to your mum? What would you say to your kids? If they keep doing that and you see them hurting, you'd probably tell them to stop. So yeah,
self-compassion is something that comes up so much, obviously, in the body positive, the body inclusive space, and fat positive space. And it's something we talked about a lot in week 1 of our unchallenged. So and there is, if you know Kristen Neff, she's one of the quite big researchers around self-compassion, and she talks about tender self-compassion and fierce self-compassion, and finding that balance between what you need. And that tender self-compassion is a little more like that nurturing and that kind and caring voice. And the fierce self-compassion is when you're maybe standing up for yourself or setting your own boundaries and stuff. And sometimes you need a little bit of both, but it sounds like, you know, that real tender self-compassion might be what's needed, and when you're going through really extreme chronic pain. So that will resonate with our members. And do you have another tip?
Yeah, and I'd say, and I know that a lot of people find it annoying, and I did find it annoying when I heard about it in the beginning, but patience. So being patient and sort of, I'd say, you know, working with a group of people that know what they're doing. So I'd definitely recommend just seeing somebody, whether it's an exercise physiologist or a physiotherapist, someone who understands. And a lot of times psychologists are really, really helpful as well. Sort of having that multidisciplinary team of people helping is great. And being patient, just sort of trusting that things will get better, even though, you know, they might not get back to the point where you were 10 years ago. For a long time, I was sort of hoping things to get to the same moment sort of before I injured myself or before I did all this. It never did. And I don't think it ever will. But sort of accepting where you are now, which is very, very difficult, and it's a process, and I don't say it easily. I don't say it's easy, but being patient and just accepting that, you know, this is where you are now, but things can definitely get better. And even if your pain levels don't get down, and sometimes they don't, you can manage really, really well, and you can actually live your life. You know, your quality of life can get a lot better, even though your pain can be sort of on similar levels. For a long time, I am actually still in pain. Like today, it's just hurting because I've got my uni exams and it's stressful. So it's hurting, but I sort of manage around it, and I still get to do things that I want to do. So yeah, just be compassionate and be patient, and and hopefully things will get better.
Yeah, patience is tricky, I know, but it's so valuable. I think in this day and age, we're so used to rushing through and expecting answers and results and the quick fixes. And just like diet culture, you know, we're taught sort of that there are solutions to just fix things straight away. And I think it's really valuable to slow down, be patient, and be understanding and accepting that things do change, our bodies do change, and sometimes that means that they don't perform the way we want them to, or they look the way we want them to. But being kind and compassionate regardless of whatever's changes are happening is really valuable for, you know, a long and a peaceful relationship with your body. And
I agree, and I think you can really relate that to diet culture as well. So it's expecting people to look a certain way, to feel a certain way, and to also have that one fix. You know, once you lose that weight, then your life's going to be a lot better. Once you lose that pain, once you're pain-free, then your life's going to be a lot better. But a lot of times it's just a lot more difficult, and there's a lot more factors than, you know, people think in the whole process. So yeah, definitely relating that, I thought. And that's why I think, you know, I love Haven as well. So sort of, you know, having that compassion towards people and seeing them as people, not only as, you know, the looks or the pain or the injury. It's always a lot more than that. So yeah.
We are much more than our bodies.
Oh yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story. That's really,
Oh,
really
you're very welcome. I know that I was probably sort of mumbling
Oh,
halfway through,
it was
losing myself in what I wanted to say,
Love
but
that.
I hope, it's helpful.
I think it's, for one, it's really helpful for others going through something similar just to hear. Like I've always found that really valuable in my journey with food and body relationship stuff. Just having others sharing their similar journey is very liberating, just to know that others are going through the same thing.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is actually an amazing book for people. And, I think I'll chat to you about it as well. There's a few links that I'd love people to have a look at. But also there's a great book called Pain Heroes by I can't remember the author, but it's basically a 10 or 15 stories of people in pain. So they're little stories of how it started and how they've gone through it and where they are now. And like for me, it was very powerful to read and to know that I'm not the only one. To be like, well, there's a lot of other people struggling with a similar thing. It might be a different kind of pain. But they're struggling and they're managing and they're there. So yes, I agree.
Cool. Well, let me keep you on the line for a minute and I'll grab a few of those resources and we'll share those with the members. Thank you, Barbara.
You're very welcome.
See you online soon.
Thanks. See ya.